Hello everyone, I'd like to talk to you today about education in the UK and more specifically about Ofsted. And for those of you who don't know what Ofsted is, it's the organisation that's responsible for inspecting schools in the UK and for making sure that they reach the right standards. Both my parents are teachers, so I've experienced what it's like for them to go through an inspection. And I admit that these inspections are necessary. You need some sort of regulation. But I'd like to argue that in its current format, Ofsted is not effective. I'll begin by saying that the inspections cause a lot of stress, and that's stress for the management, for the teachers, and for the children themselves. This stress can have negative impact. So, for example, a lesson that might have been good before would turn out to be a lot worse due to the pressure that the teacher is being put under. In terms of the actual guidelines put in place by Ofsted, they are constantly changing. The head of Ofsted, Michael Wilshaw, can't seem to stop changing the framework and the hoops that you have to jump through in order to have an outstanding lesson. This means that the guidelines are now so rigid that there is no real scope for creativity. A teacher is spending so much time making sure that their lesson fits exactly the guidelines, Ofsted's guidelines, that they're actually forgetting that they need to teach the children. I'd also like to argue that there's a certain amount of inconsistency within Ofsted. I'll give you an example. In 2009, Ofsted had 2,000 inspectors, and they said that most of those had experience working with children. However, it turned out, and they were forced to admit, that a lot of them, and actually most of them, had not had any real experience working with children. This means that the different teams going about doing their inspections often come to different judgments because some have had experience and some have not. So, for example, a very good school might receive a very unfair judgment, whilst a school that should have received a lower one actually gets a good result. As with any organisation, there is a certain level of corruption within Ofsted. You are given normally half a day's notice before your inspection. However, I'd like to give you the example of the so-called superhead, Rachel D'Souza. A superhead is a head who is in charge of multiple schools. Rachel D'Souza was held up as the ideal head teacher. In fact, Michael Gove said that he would like to clone her 23,000 times. So she was put forward as the model for head teachers to follow. It then transpired that she had received prior warning and a lot of warning before her inspection. In fact, she had been able to communicate with inspectors and engineer the time at which she was inspected. It also meant that she could communicate with the teachers, give them warning and prepare them for their inspection, and even sit down the children and ask them to behave properly during the inspection. In conclusion, I fully admit that there is a need for some sort of regulation within schools. Otherwise, how can schools be good schools? How can they meet the right standards? However, the current format, in my opinion, does not work properly because you need a lot more flexibility in order for schools to provide the right environment for learning. Thank you very much.